It was past midnight when the knocking started, violent, desperate, echoing through the stillness of my house like a warning. I remember sitting up, disoriented, still half in my uniform from a double shift. The city outside was quiet, that strange kind of silence only found after midnight. But the pounding didn't stop. Each blow to the door felt like it was striking my chest. "Who's there?" I called out, my hand instinctively reaching for the service pistol I kept by the side table. There was no answer, just a low sob, muffled, like someone was trying to swallow their own cries. My instincts took over. I unlocked the door, and then I saw her, my daughter, my Sofia. She collapsed into my arms before I could even speak. Her body was trembling, her clothes torn, one shoe missing. When I pulled her closer, the smell of blood hit me metallic and raw. I lifted her face and my heart cracked in two. Her lip was split, her left eye swollen shut, purple and blue. Her hands clutched at her stomach like she was trying to hold herself together. "Mama, please," she whispered. Her voice, it wasn't even her voice anymore. It was hollow, broken. I helped her inside, every step careful. I could barely breathe. I sat her on the couch and turned on the lamp. The light revealed what my mind refused to accept: bruises along her arms, her ribs, and when she tried to catch her breath, she winced and folded over in pain. "Sofia, what happened?" I managed to ask, though my throat felt like it was closing. She looked away. "It's Marco," she said, barely audible. "He got angry because I found out about her, the other woman, and just like that, my blood turned to ice. Marco, my son-in-law. The man I had welcomed into our family 5 years ago. The man who stood in my living room promising to cherish my daughter for life. The man I trusted. I felt something shift inside me. Then, not just pain, but something deeper. Something sharp. A quiet, dangerous calm that only comes when the world stops making sense. I was a police officer. So I had seen crime scenes, domestic cases, women beaten by the men they loved. But never did I imagine that one day, my daughter would be one of them. I cleaned her wounds carefully, the way I used to when she was little, and scraped her knees at the park. But these wounds were different. These weren't from falling. These were from betrayal. I lifted her blouse gently, and my breath caught. A massive purple bruise spread across her abdomen. Some injuries looked old, others fresh. This wasn't the first time. This was a pattern. I wanted to scream, to drive to Marco's house that second and put him in handcuffs myself. But training and something else held me back. Control. I needed control. "Listen to me, Sofia," I said, my voice trembling, but steady enough. "You're safe now. I won't let him touch you again. Ever." Her tears flowed freely then, soaking my sleeve. He said if I tell anyone, he'll ruin us. He'll take the store, the land, everything Grandpa left. I froze. It's the land. My father's land. A family inheritance passed down through generations. What did that have to do with Marco? But I didn't ask then. I just wrapped my arms around her, whispering the words I had once told her as a child. "You're safe now. Mama S here." That night, I drove her to the hospital. My friend, Dr. Isabel Gutierrez, was on duty. When she saw Sofia, her eyes widened. She didn't ask questions, she just acted. She documented every bruise, every cut, every swollen mark. She promised me, quietly, "We'll make sure this doesn't go unpunished." As the doctor worked, Sofia's phone buzzed on the tray beside her. Over and over. I glanced at the screen. Marco. Dozens of messages. "Don't you dare talk to anyone. You'll regret it. You know what I can do?" I took the phone, turned it off, and looked at my reflection in the hospital glass. My badge glinted under the fluorescent light, a reminder of the oath I'd taken. To protect. To serve. But that night, it wasn't the badge that mattered. It was the mother wearing it. And in that reflection, I made a promise to myself. He would never hurt her again. Not my daughter. Not my Sofia. Not while I'm still breathing. What I didn't know then was how far Marco had already gone and how much I would have to sacrifice to bring him down. I didn't sleep that night. The house was still, except for the steady sound of Sofia's breathing from the guest room. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of cold coffee, staring at the wall, listening to the rain start against the windows. It used to comfort me, that sound, but not anymore. Now it felt like the world was weeping for her. Every few minutes I glanced at the hallway, half afraid she'd wake up screaming. When she finally did stir at dawn, she looked fragile, pale against the white sheets. But she was alive, and that was enough reason to start fighting. I knew what I had to do. By 8 in the morning, I was at the precinct. I didn't tell anyone the full truth, not yet. I just told Commander Ruiz, my closest friend on the force, that I needed a few personal days. He looked at me, concerned, but didn't pry. He'd seen that look in my eyes before. The look that said, not now. When I got home, I started with evidence. My training kicked in automatically, methodical, precise. I photographed Sofia's injuries one by one, careful to include time and date stamps. Each click of the camera echoed like a gunshot in that quiet house. Then I opened a file folder, labeling it with his name, Marco Alvarez. It felt strange writing his name like that, not his family, but as a suspect. Around noon, I called Clara, my neighbor. She lived across the street and had a camera that faced the front of my house. She was the kind of woman who noticed everything. Gossip first, kindness second. But that morning, her face softened when I asked, "Elena, I saw her last night," she whispered. "Your girl." She looked terrified. "I need your footage from around midnight," I said. She hesitated only a moment before nodding. Of course, when I checked the footage later, my stomach twisted. There it was, the faint glow of headlights stopping down the street. Sofia stumbling out of the car, clutching her side. The camera caught her desperate knocks at my door, the way she almost fell against it. It also caught the car pulling away Marco's car. That was the first real piece of evidence. And it wouldn't be the last. I called my lawyer, Javier Ortega. We worked together years ago on a domestic abuse case that ended badly. The victim had dropped charges out of fear. I knew Javier would understand the stakes. "Elena," he said after hearing everything, his tone grim. "You can't handle this as a police officer. You have to handle it as a mother. Let me file the initial report. I'll make sure it's airtight." He was right. If I used my badge improperly, it could backfire. Marco's family had connections. Whispers of money laundering through his pawn shops. Political favors traded behind closed doors. I couldn't afford even one misstep. By evening, Marco's messages grew angrier. He tried calling from different numbers, leaving voice notes, threats laced with false tenderness. "You're overreacting, Sofia. I didn't mean to hit you. Come home and we'll fix this." Then another message followed, colder. "If you talk to your mother again, I swear you'll regret it." Sofia cried when she heard them. I didn't. I just saved each one to the evidence folder. Later that night, I stood in the hallway outside her room. She was asleep again, curled under my old quilt. The same quilt my mother had sewn decades ago. I thought of her, of the kind of strength she carried through her own storms. I whispered, "I'll protect you, Mia, even if it's the last thing I do." But deep inside, I already knew this wasn't just about protection anymore. This was about justice. 2 days later, Sofia's hospital report came through. Isabel had documented everything. The bruises, the swelling, the contusions consistent with repeated blunt trauma. She'd even noted older healing fractures on Sofia's ribs. That meant this had been happening for months. Maybe longer. When I asked Sofia why she hadn't told me before, she looked away and whispered, "Because I thought he'd change. Mama, I didn't want to disappoint you." Those words gutted me. Disappoint me? No. The disappointment was mine. I had failed to see the signs. The nervous smiles at family dinners. The makeup she wore heavier than before. The excuses for bruises. "Oh, I bumped into the cabinet." I believed her because I wanted to, but not anymore. That night, I sealed the folder. Photos, medical reports, messages, video. I placed my badge on top for a moment, staring at it under the desk lamp's glow. Then I said quietly to myself, this isn't about the badge anymore. This is about a mother's justice. And as if on cue, my phone buzzed with a new message from Javier. Elena, I found something about Marco's business. You'll want to see this. My heart sank because I knew that whatever he had discovered would only be the beginning. When Javier told me he had something, I didn't expect my whole view of Marco to collapse that fast. We met at a quiet cafe near the courthouse the next morning, the kind of place where the coffee's always burnt and the gossip travels faster than the steam. He was already there, a thick folder open in front of him, his tie slightly loosened, his expression grim. Elena, he said as soon as I sat down, this isn't just about domestic abuse anymore. Co's hiding something big. He slid the folder toward me. Inside were copies of land transfer records, notarized documents, and at the bottom 2 signatures, mine and Sofia's. Except we'd never signed them. What is this? I asked, though the answer was already sinking in. It's your father's property, Javier said. The land near San Felipe. The title shows that you and Sofia sold it to Marco 6 months ago. But the signatures are forged. Badly forged. And the buyer listed beneath Marco's name. He turned the page. Is a woman named Valeria Torres? My hands clenched around the paper. Valeria. He nodded. She's the woman Sofia mentioned. The mistress. For a long time, I couldn't speak. My father had worked his entire life for that land. Dry, sun-scorched fields that he had turned into something beautiful, green with olive trees and wild lavender. It was the only thing he left us before he died. And now, this man, this parasite, had tried to steal it just to impress another woman. The betrayal burned deeper than anything I'd ever felt. I wasn't just dealing with a violent man anymore. I was facing a calculating thief. Javier leaned closer. If we can prove the forgery, it strengthens the case. Fraud, coercion, abuse. It paints a full picture of who he really is. But you have to be careful. He'll fight back. I don't care, I said. I want him exposed. When I got home that evening, Sofia was sitting on the porch watching the sunset with a blank stare. I sat beside her quietly. For a while, we didn't say a word. The silence between us was heavy but necessary. Finally, she said softly, he told me that if I signed something, it was just for paperwork for taxes. He said it was to help your finances. Mama, I didn't know what it really was. I took her hand. You didn't do anything wrong. He lied to you. I knew confronting Valeria would be dangerous. She wasn't just some naive girl. She was entangled with a man who used manipulation like a weapon. But I also knew something else. People like Marco always overestimate their control. And when their lies start to crumble, those closest to them are the first to panic. So I started with patience. Through an old contact in the licensing department, I learned where Valeria worked, a trendy bar downtown, half lounge, half illusion of luxury. I drove there one evening after my shift, dressed not in uniform, but in plain clothes. I didn't want her to see a police officer. I wanted her to see a woman, a mother. The place smelled of perfume, gin, and desperation. Couples laughed at the bar and soft jazz filled the air. I spotted her instantly, Valeria, behind the counter. Her red lipstick matching the blazer she'd worn that day at the courthouse. Her charm was deliberate, her smile practiced. When her shift ended, I followed her outside. She lit a cigarette, the glow of the ember briefly illuminating her tired face. That's when I stepped closer. Valeria Torres, I asked. She turned, startled. Her eyes scanned me quickly, wary but curious. Do I know you? No, I said softly. But you know my daughter. She froze. Her cigarette slipped from her fingers and hit the wet pavement. I let the silence hang. The sound of distant traffic filled the space between us. I'm Elena Reyes, I continued. Sofia's mother. She blinked, the name hitting her like a slap. I didn't mean to. You didn't mean to? What? I interrupted. To sleep with her husband? To forge her signature? To steal my father's land? Her lips parted in shock, then defiance. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't insult me, I said, stepping closer. I have the documents, the proof. Your name is on the title transfer, Valeria. And the only reason you're not in a holding cell right now is because I haven't filed it yet. For a moment, she tried to hold my gaze, but then her voice faltered. Marco told me you gave him permission. He said it was his family's inheritance. I shook my head slowly. He lied. Just like he lied to Sofia. Just like he's lying to you. Her eyes darted away. You think you can scare me because you're a cop? I smiled faintly. I'm not here as a cop. I'm here as a mother who is tired of watching men like Marco destroy everything they touch. But you still have a chance to walk away. If you tell the truth. She crossed her arms, trying to appear strong, but her hands trembled. I could see it, the cracks in her composure, the guilt, the fear. Why should I trust you? She asked quietly. Because Marco won't protect you, I said. You're just another pawn to him. Do you think he'll stand by you when this comes out? He's already moving money to accounts in his brother's name. He's planning to disappear Valeria without you. Her face drained of color. How do you know that? I didn't answer. Didn't have to. The truth was, Javier had found records of wire transfers in Marco's financial reports, but I wanted her to believe I knew more than I did. She exhaled shakily, staring at the ground. He said, he loved me. They always say that, I said softly. Until they need someone to blame. For a long moment, she was silent. The rain started again, slow, steady drops that tapped against the asphalt. Then she whispered, what do you want from me? I want the truth. I want you to testify. To admit what Marco did, the forgery, the abuse, the lies. You help me and I'll make sure you don't go down with him. Her eyes lifted to mine. There was no defiance now, only fear. And if I don't, then you'll face prison time for fraud. You'll lose everything, including the one thing Marco promised you. A future. She turned away, wiping her eyes. For the first time, I saw the real Valeria. Not the woman in red, not the confident bar hostess, but a scared girl who had believed the wrong man. I need time, she whispered. You don't have time, I said gently. He's already destroying you. Then I handed her a small card, Javier's number, my number, and the address of the safe house Commander Ruiz could arrange. Call when you're ready, I told her. But if you wait too long, you won't get a second chance. I left her standing there, cigarette forgotten, her eyes following me as I walked into the rain. That night, I lay awake again. Sofia was sleeping soundly for the first time in weeks, but my mind wouldn't stop turning. I thought about Valeria, and how I had seen in her the same kind of fear once seen in Sofia. Maybe Marco's kingdom wasn't built on strength after all. Maybe it was built on fear. And fear, once exposed, can crumble faster than any wall. 3 days passed without a call. Every hour felt like a test of patience or faith. I went through the motions at work, answering calls, signing reports, keeping my head down. But underneath, the tension was electric, humming through my chest like a live wire. Every night, I checked my phone, hoping for a message from Valeria. Nothing. Sofia was beginning to heal slowly. The bruises faded to yellow. Her appetite returned, and she even smiled once or twice. But there was still a shadow in her eyes, that kind of hollow you don't erase with medicine. Then, on the 4th night, the phone rang. Elena. It was a whisper, shaky, barely audible over what sounded like rain. It's me, Valeria. I sat upright instantly. Where are you? I can't talk long, she said. He knows something's wrong. He's been following me, checking my phone. I'm scared. Listen to me carefully, I said. You're not safe with him. I can protect you, but you have to trust me. There was a pause, then a deep exhale. Okay, she said. I'll do it. I'll testify. That single word, testify, was the first real breath of hope I'd had in weeks. I called Ruiz immediately, and within an hour, he had arranged for Valeria to be moved to a safe house under discreet surveillance. She would stay there until we could prepare her statement with Javier. But the calm didn't last. The next morning, Sofia's car window was smashed. Nothing was stolen, but on the driver's seat lay a single photo, a picture of her and Marco. smiling on their wedding day. Across it, written in red marker, were the words, "Families fall apart when you talk." Sofia broke down, clutching the photo to her chest. I pulled her close, my anger rising like fire in my veins. "He won't stop until we stop him," I said. We filed the incident report quietly through Ruiz's unit, but I knew how this game worked. Marco was sending a message not just to scare Sofia, but to rattle me. He wanted me emotional, reckless. He wanted me to break my own rules. Instead, I became colder. That same afternoon, Javier and I met Valeria at the safe house. She looked exhausted, her once perfect hair tied back, her face bare, pale. But her eyes, they were clearer now. No more illusions. She handed over her phone, her financial statements, and a notebook she'd kept during her months with Marco. In her own handwriting were details of the forgery dates, bank transfers, conversations she'd overheard about cleaning Sofia's name from certain documents. When she spoke, her voice trembled. "He told me he forged the signatures because he needed leverage. He said if Sofia ever tried to leave, he'd make her regret it. He even showed me the papers, laughed about how easy it was to fake everything." I swallowed hard. "Did he ever mention where the originals are kept?" "In his office at the pawn shop," she said. "In a safe under the floorboards." Javier nodded. "If we can get a warrant, that's it. Game over." But getting a warrant against someone as slippery as Marco wasn't easy. His lawyer was already spreading lies that Sofia was unstable, that I was abusing my badge to harass him. Rumors started swirling around the precinct. Even some officers looked at me differently. The kind of look that said, maybe she's gone too far. Ruiz stayed loyal. "Ignore them," he told me. "You've got truth on your side." "Truth doesn't always win," I said quietly. "Not at first." A few nights later, I found Sofia sitting on the porch again, her phone in her hands. "He called me," she whispered. I didn't answer, but I listened to the voicemail. He sounded so calm. "Mama, he said he missed me, but he wanted to fix things." I took her phone and deleted the message. "That's not love, Sofia. That's control." She looked at me, tears in her eyes. "Do you ever wish you'd never met someone?" I hesitated. "Yes," I said. But then I remember it's not about wishing it never happened. It's about surviving what did. The next day, Javier called. "You've got it," he said. Valeria's testimony was enough. The judge approved the warrant. We searched the pawn shop tomorrow. Finally, it felt like the tide was turning. That night, as I prepared for bed, I looked at Sofia's childhood photo, her first school uniform, her missing front tooth, her arms wrapped around me. I whispered a promise to that little girl in the picture. "It's almost over, Mia. Just a little longer, but I should have known better." Because when people like Marco feel cornered, they don't surrender. They strike back. The morning of the raid began like any other, deceptively calm. The city was still wrapped in mist, the streets empty except for the occasional hum of a bus in the distance. I met Ruiz and the team at the precinct, warrant in hand, my heart pounding in a rhythm I hadn't felt since my early years on patrol. "This is by the book," Ruiz reminded everyone. No shortcuts, no personal angles. He didn't have to say my name, but his eyes found mine anyway. I nodded. "I understand." We reached Marco's pawn shop just after sunrise. It was a small, unassuming building tucked between a laundromat and a bakery, its faded sign barely legible. I'd been there once years ago, the day he first opened, smiling proudly beside Sofia, pretending to be a man of ambition. Now all I could see was rot beneath the surface. Ruiz's voice came over the radio. "We're in position. Go." The door splintered open with one sharp hit. Inside, the air smelled of dust and metal. Shelves lined with second-hand jewelry and electronics loomed in the dim light. And there he was, Marco standing behind the counter, shock frozen on his face before turning into something darker. "Elena," he said, his tone dripping with disdain. "So it's true. If you really are using your badge to destroy your own family." I ignored him. "Marco Alvarez, we have a warrant to search these premises." He laughed, low and bitter. "For what? You think you can intimidate me?" You think some hysterical women in a forged signature will bring me down? Ruiz motioned to the officers to begin the search. I stood still, eyes locked on Marcos, refusing to flinch. He muttered under his breath, pacing like a caged animal, his confidence starting to crack as the minutes passed. Then came the sound I'd been waiting for, the dull metallic clink as one of the officers lifted a floorboard. "Commander," he called, "we've got a safe." My pulse quickened. Ruiz knelt, pried it open, and pulled out a stack of documents, a small flash drive, and several bundles of cash. The officer handed the papers to me. And there it was, the original deed to my father's land. The signatures were crisp, clean, and undeniably forged. Javier's words echoed in my head. If we find the originals, we have him. Marco's composure shattered. "You can't take that. That's private property." I looked up at him, steady and cold. "You mean stolen property?" He lunged forward, fury blazing in his eyes, but Ruiz stepped in, pinning him against the counter. "Don't make this worse for yourself," Ruiz warned. "Worse," Marco spat. "You think this is over? You don't know what you've started?" He turned his head toward me, voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You think Sofia's safe? She's not. You can't protect her forever." That was the moment I realized the truth. He wasn't scared of losing the case. He was scared of losing control. And men like Marco, when they lose control, they become truly dangerous. The search concluded, and he was taken in for questioning. But that night, I couldn't rest. Every creak in the house, every passing car outside made my nerves tighten. I double-checked the locks, peered through the curtains, and sat awake in the living room with my service pistol holstered at my side. Around midnight, Sofia came down the hall, her eyes wide. She whispered, "There's someone outside." I froze. The soft crunch of footsteps echoed from the backyard, slow, deliberate. I motioned for her to stay behind me, then crept to the window. A figure moved through the shadows, tall, familiar. My stomach dropped. "Stay here," I said firmly. I stepped onto the porch, flashlight in one hand, weapon in the other. The beam cut through the dark, catching the edge of a face I'd once trusted. Marco. His eyes gleamed with a wild, desperate light. "You think you've won?" he hissed. "You ruined my life, Elena. You turned my wife against me. She was never yours to ruin," I said. He took a step forward, and for a second, the world went still, the air heavy with tension, the night alive with fear. My finger hovered near the trigger, not out of hatred, but duty. Ruiz's patrol car lights suddenly swept across the driveway, flashing red and blue. Marco froze as Ruiz's voice thundered, "Hands where I can see them." In that instant, all the rage drained from Marco's face. He dropped his arms to his sides, defeated. As the officers cuffed him, he looked at me one last time and said quietly, almost mournfully, "You'll regret this. You'll see what justice really costs." Maybe he was right. Justice does have a cost, but silence costs far more. When they drove him away, Sofia stepped onto the porch and clung to me. She was trembling, but for the first time, her tears weren't of fear. They were of relief. I held her tightly and whispered, "It's over, Mia." But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Not yet. There was still the trial, the reckoning that would decide everything. And in court, the truth wouldn't just set us free. It would burn everything he built to ashes. The courthouse smelled faintly of dust and old wood polish, the same as it always had. But that morning, it felt different. Heavy. Electric. As if the air itself knew that lives were about to be changed forever. Sofia sat beside me at the plaintiff's table, her hands trembling slightly. She wore a pale blue dress, simple and modest, the same color she'd worn at her wedding. I caught her glancing down at her fingers, the ones that once wore a wedding band. It was gone now. That ring had been evidence. "Are you ready?" I asked quietly. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I just want it to be over." Mama Javier sat on the other side of us, his briefcase open, documents neatly arranged. "We'll make it over," he said. Once and for all. The courtroom was packed, journalists, neighbors, even officers from my own precinct. Everyone had heard the rumors, and now they wanted to see what was true. On the opposite side, Marco sat with his lawyer, impeccably dressed, his hair slicked back, the very picture of false dignity. But his eyes told the truth, hollow, sleepless, angry. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. The trial began. Javier's opening statement was calm but powerful. He spoke of trust, of violence behind closed doors, of the courage it takes to tell the truth after years of fear. He laid out the evidence, the medical reports, the threatening messages, the forged land deeds. Every word hit like a hammer. When it was the defense's turn, Marco's lawyer painted a grotesque version of reality, that Sofia was unstable, that she had fabricated the abuse, that I had manipulated her to extort Marco after a family dispute. I clenched my fists under the table, but Javier placed a hand on my arm. "Let him talk," he whispered. "Lies only have power when we react." The first to testify was Dr. Isabel Gutierrez. Her voice was calm, clinical, and devastating. She described Sofia's injuries in detail: the bruises, the internal bleeding, the healing fractures. The courtroom shifted uncomfortably. When she was done, the defense tried to imply the injuries could have been accidental. Isabel's eyes flashed. "I've treated accident victims for 20 years, she said firmly. These were not accidents. Next came Clara, my neighbor. She described the night Sofia came to my door, the frantic knocking, the way she collapsed in my arms. Then she confirmed the security footage. The defense tried to trip her up, but Clara held her ground. "You can spin it however you want," she said sharply. But I saw what I saw. Finally, it was Valeria's turn. She walked to the stand in a gray blazer, her hair tied back. The room went still. Even Marco shifted uneasily. For a moment, their eyes met, and I saw something flicker in his expression. Fear. Her voice shook at first. "I was involved with Marco Alvarez," she began. "He told me he was separated from his wife. He wasn't." She went on to describe the fraud, how Marco had forged the land documents, manipulated her into signing, and promised her a share of the profits once the property was sold. When Javier asked why she came forward, she looked at me. "Because she gave me a chance," she said softly. "She could have destroyed me, but she didn't. And because of that, I couldn't keep lying." The defense tried to discredit her, but Valeria held steady. By the time she stepped down, Marco's composure was cracking. His jaw tightened, his hands fidgeted. Then it was my turn. I stood, straightened my uniform, and took the oath. As I faced the judge, I saw years of my life flash before me the day I joined the force. The day Sofia was born, the night she showed up bleeding on my doorstep. "I've worn this badge for 30 years, I began, seen the worst humanity can do. But nothing prepares you for when that evil walks into your own home." I told them everything, not as a cop, but as a mother. The fear, the anger, the helplessness. How I had watched my daughter lose her light one bruise at a time. Then I turned toward Marco. "That man," I said, pointing directly at him, "is not a husband. He is a coward who hides behind lies and power. And I will not allow him or anyone to think they can destroy their family and still call it love." The courtroom was silent. Marco's lawyer objected, but the judge overruled him. When the final evidence was presented, the original forged deed from the pawn shop, the judge leaned forward, studying it carefully. Then he looked at Marco. "Mr. Alvarez," he said slowly, "do you have anything to say before I deliver my decision?" Marco stood, his voice sharp and trembling. "This is a setup. They're all lying. She's using her badge to ruin me." The judge's expression didn't change. "The evidence says otherwise." He lifted his gavel. "The court finds in favor of the plaintiff. Marco Alvarez is hereby found guilty of fraud, forgery, and aggravated assault. His assets are frozen pending restitution. A permanent protection order is granted for Sofia Reyes, and this case will be referred for criminal prosecution." The gavel struck once, sharp, final. Marco's face turned pale as officers moved in. When the cuffs clicked around his wrists, he looked up at me one last time, eyes wide, hollow, defeated. I didn't look away. Sofia began to cry softly beside me. Not from sadness, but release. It was over. Or at least that's what I thought. Because justice may end in court, but healing, that takes a lifetime. The day after the verdict, the city felt quieter than I'd ever known it. Even the hum of traffic outside my window seemed distant, muted, as if the world itself was taking a breath after holding it for too long. Sofia and I sat in the kitchen that morning, sunlight spilling across the table, catching on the rim of 2 untouched coffee cups. For the first time in months, there were no phone calls from lawyers, no reporters at the door, no whispers from neighbors. Just the sound of the clock ticking, steady and calm. She looked at me, her eyes still puffy from crying the night before. "Mama," she said softly, "is it really over?" I reached across the table, took her hand. "The court part is over. Yes. The rest?" I smiled faintly. "That takes time, Mia." She nodded, her gaze drifting toward the small garden outside, the one my late husband planted years ago. The roses were blooming again despite the months of neglect. I saw her notice it too, and something in her face softened. Maybe it was hope. Maybe just the quiet realization that life somehow keeps growing. For weeks afterward, we lived in silence, but it wasn't the heavy silence of fear anymore. It was the kind that feels like healing, slow, uncertain, but real. Sofia started seeing a therapist, someone kind and patient. She began sketching again, just small things at first. The cat by the window, the view from the porch, a portrait of my hands folded on the table. She laughed one evening when she showed me, and the sound nearly brought me to tears. I had missed that laugh more than I could ever say. The town began to change too. People who once turned their backs now offered quiet apologies in the grocery store or the church parking lot. Some didn't say a word, just nodded respectfully as we passed. It wasn't forgiveness I wanted, it was acknowledgement, the kind of truth that doesn't need to be spoken out loud. Marco, I later heard, was awaiting sentencing in a county jail. His lawyer had withdrawn after Valeria's testimony, and his businesses were under investigation for money laundering. It should have made me feel triumphant. It didn't. It made me tired, but strangely free. One evening Ruiz stopped by. He stood at the gate, hat in hand, the way old friends do when words feel too formal. "You did good, Reyes," he said. "You did right?" I looked at him for a long moment before answering. Doing right doesn't always feel good. He smiled knowingly. "No, but it means you can sleep at night." After he left, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and watched the sun dip behind the hills. Sofia came out after a while, draping a blanket over my shoulders. She sat beside me, silent for a long time, then said, "You know, I used to think justice was about punishment, but now I think it's about being able to breathe again." Her words hit me harder than she realized. I squeezed her hand. "Okay, then maybe we finally have ours." A gentle breeze moved through the garden, rustling the roses. For the first time in so long, the air didn't feel heavy. It felt alive. Weeks turned into months. Sofia found a new job at a small design studio downtown. Every morning she left with that same spark I thought I'd never see again. And every evening she came home humming some tune from the radio, her steps lighter, her eyes clearer. One afternoon she surprised me with a small framed drawing, a watercolor of the two of us sitting on the porch, the garden blooming around us. Below it she'd written in careful script, "For my mother who taught me what justice really means." I couldn't speak. I just held her, my tears falling silently onto her shoulder. Later that night, as I prepared for bed, I paused by the mirror. The woman staring back was older, yes, more lined, more tired, but also stronger. Not the same officer who once believed the law could fix everything. Not the same mother who thought love alone could save her child. I had learned that, sometimes, justice requires both. The law to make it right, and love to make it whole. Before turning off the light, I whispered a quiet prayer. Not for revenge, not for victory, but for peace. For every woman still afraid to knock on a door in the middle of the night. For every mother who still waits for her daughter to come home safe. And as the house settled into stillness, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Gratitude for survival, for truth, for the chance to begin again. Justice hadn't come easily, it never does. But it had come. And in its wake it left something even stronger. Hope.